Greetings, dear colleagues and partners. It is really my honor to welcome you to the closing session of the Asian Evaluation Week. Running in its 7th year now, the AEW continues to generate strong interest from a wide range of stakeholders. This year, again, we are very pleased to see a significant increase in audience participation, which we believe is indicative of growing interest in evaluation as a discipline, and also in particular in its role during these challenging times. Let us first start by taking a look at this short video that we have prepared that shows some of the highlights from the past 3 days.
Warm greetings to all. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the 7th Asian Evaluation Week, hosted as a hybrid event. Countries are now gradually beginning to revitalize their economies.
The Asian Evaluation Week catalyzed the use of the role of the evaluation in development effectiveness by promoting an interface between policymakers and evaluators across the world. So I wish you a very, very fruitful discussion today, and it's a pleasure to be here. And like I said, hopefully the next one we can see all 600 of you, face to face somewhere.
As the world recovers from the pandemic, we all talk about adjusting to the so-called new normal. Now, this doesn't mean picking up where we left off in March of 2020. After all, we as individuals took the opportunity to assess our practices and behaviors. We as evaluators also need to adjust. In doing so, we need to gather evidence that will help decision makers recover in a way that addresses the longer-term challenges of green, inclusive, and resilient development. Enjoy the sessions. Marami pong salamat, and thank you very much.
Great. So as countries develop roadmaps for recovery from the pandemic and make strategic shifts toward the new normal, platforms such as the Asian Evaluation Week, with IED's leadership and that of its partners, are responding to the increased demand for evaluation knowledge in support of evidence-based decision-making. During this week, we benefited from the knowledge and insights of speakers representing governments, multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, the private sector, and the academia. The very rich and substantive discussions that we had on the crucial topics of retooling evaluation, driving collective action, strengthening evaluation influence, and promoting a learning culture, I believe will help steer the direction for evaluation on a number of fronts. Let me try to quickly summarize some of the key points that emerged from the discussions that we had. First, higher quality, improved focus, and innovations in evaluation tools and methods. We have learned from the experiences of many organizations the potential and value of using formative and real-time evaluation approaches, big data, artificial intelligence, geospatial analytics, just to name a few. These tools and techniques will help inform decision-making and support governments in addressing growing complexities, uncertainties, and the risks as they develop the roadmaps for recovery and the way forward towards the new normal. Second, deep learning, drawing from evaluation lessons, particularly on climate action and on SDG goals. Discussions on the transformational change through innovative financing for climate actions will inform policy and strategy formulation. These evaluation studies offer valuable lessons for the most vulnerable countries, such as the small island developing states, in managing existential climate risks and challenging. Equally important, building M&E capabilities within national systems and citizens is essential for tracking SDG targets and related financing. Third, greater utilization and influence of evaluation. As emphasized by several speakers, stakeholder consultations, outreach and dissemination at various stages is key to evaluation, utilization, and influence. Influence does not end with the completion of a report and management actions. As some speakers have emphasized, evaluation function is essentially a service to development, and this process can cultivate an evaluative way of thinking and promoting learning culture more generally. So, shaken but not deterred. No, this is not the title of the next Bond movie, not that I'm aware of. It is the title of the final panel of the Asian Evaluation Week, where our esteemed panelists will discuss the role of evaluation in supporting green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. Before we move to the panel, I would like to thank the Asia Pacific Finance Development Institute for the strong partnership that we have enjoyed for 7 years, and I have no doubt for many more years to come. And we are also very pleased that Vice President of AFDI, Mr. Liu Xin, is able to join us today, and he will address the panel, the audience after the panel. So let me just briefly introduce our panelists next. First, we have Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, Socioeconomic Planning Secretary and Director General of National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines. Welcome, Secretary Arsenio. We have Mr. Kouqing, who is the Director General of the ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic Research Office, or AMRO. We have Mr. Oscar Garcia, Director of Independent Evaluation of UNDP, and Ms. Jyotsna Puri, Associate Vice President of Strategy and Knowledge Department of IFAD. The session will be moderated by Mr. Manny Jimenez, DG of IED. Thank you very much, and over to you, DG Manny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sona, and thank you to the panelists for joining us. Sona, you did a great job to capture the messages of 3 very rich days of discussion. And I hope that that will actually provide an impetus for this conversation that we'd like to have among our panelists. This is indeed a distinguished panel who bring different perspectives on how evaluation can be reframed to help guide economies towards a recovery that is green, inclusive, and resilient. We will have points of view from top leaders from a national government, a regional international organization that's not the ADB, a global sectoral organization, IFAD, and a global development organization, UNDP. Despite these different perspectives, the individuals that we invited have also something in common. They have both been demanders and producers of evaluation in their varied careers. So they're actually a great group to help us look forward. And the overarching question for all of them is, what advice do you have to the evaluation community, especially to those of us in Asia, in this reframing of evaluation? So in the format, as I tried to emphasize, I'd like this to be a conversation among all of us. This is the best way to elicit your thoughts. And I hope you think of yourselves as sitting on virtual couches in a relaxed way. I'll begin by asking you a couple of overarching questions to start the discussion, but I would also encourage you in your reply that if you want to ask questions of each other, please feel free to do so. And then towards the end, we'll turn to questions from the audience. So I'd like to begin, if I might, by asking a question from the representative from our host country here in the ADB, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, or RC as he likes to be called. RC, as the equivalent of a planning minister of a fast-growing Southeast Asian country that was really hit hard by the pandemic, can you share with us your views on what you would be looking for from evaluation as you and the government of the Philippines seek to get the country back on track for its long-term development? So I'd like to ask all of you, when you start, to please try to limit your initial points to 4 minutes, because we'll have plenty of time to come back. So RC, over to you.
Thank you, Manny. I'll try to stick to the time limit. So let me start by saying that first, just to provide the context, that the Philippines is quite unique in the sense that unique in relation to the pandemic, in the sense that we have quite we impose quite extensive and long mobility restrictions, and in many places that those restrictions lasted for a long time, or almost 2 years. So the likely impact of the impact of that on the economy was quite hard. The economy contracted in 2020 by almost 10%, but the more disturbing consequences would be in the education sector, where we expected that learning poverty could have worsened. So I guess moving forward, the deep socioeconomic scarring, or the scarring in the socioeconomic fabric that the pandemic caused, requires a lot of interventions for us to recover quickly from that scarring, and because we do realize that such scarring could have long-lasting effects. Yet we know little about the extent of that scarring, especially on learning. What we do know are anecdotal evidence, and this is where evaluation comes in, and the land experiences of other countries come in useful. And so moving forward, we, at least from an evaluation perspective, we would want to see a lot of work that can be put in place, especially taking into account the Philippine context, the Philippine situations, the cultural and socio-political environment that will lead to the choice of a proper choice of instruments, policy levers that allow us to address these is carrying quite effectively. And apart from the learning, I do believe that that the SMEs suffered disproportionately as well, and in the SMEs we have much of the employment, and many of the poor are so dependent on small and medium enterprises, and the losses and the destruction of organizational capital networks could have long-lasting effects on these enterprises. And again, there it will be useful if lessons from evaluation would come in handily, help in identifying effective, potentially effective policy levers that allow us to move quickly into the new normal, especially in establishing as the theme of this evaluation week suggests, is toward a smart, green, and inclusive and resilient socioeconomic development. I can stop there, and we'll pick it up the next round, Manny.
Thanks a lot, RC. Really, you pose a very important and daunting challenge for us as evaluators to help policymakers like yourself guide that recovery. And I note in the Philippines, especially the effects of the downturn on scarring for learning and on small and medium enterprises. Kouqing, if I might turn to you, you're someone who has a perspective, having been our partner in Asian Evaluation Week for 7 years in your previous job, but now also having heading a regional organization that is doing research. Can you share with us your thoughts on how the countries in the region can interact with each other and the importance of that as they help, they try to recover as individuals? Back over to you, Kouqing.
Thank you very much, Manny. I would like to thank IED of ADB, as well as Shanghai National Accounting Institute, Asia Pacific Finance Development Institute for the kind invitation, for inviting me to join this last session of the 7th AEW. As Manny mentioned, as a participant of all AEW so far, I'm very glad to see the continuity of the very successful event. I really want to congratulate you guys for organizing such an important, also a very successful evaluation event for the evaluation community. Talking about the question raised by Manny just now. Apparently, as we can see, the pandemic has caused huge loss on human lives globally and affected our economies severely. Asian is no exception. However, based on Emmanuel's observation, after more than 2 years, it appears that the world, including ASEAN Plus region, may have finally gained some ground in the long battle against the COVID-19. COVID has caused lots of financial problems. As our earlier speaker from Philippines mentioned, both in macro and micro levels. While we address challenges of COVID-19 and try to recover from the pandemic, financial support, regional cooperation is very crucial. Actually, during the recovery process, we believe financial policies have played a very important role. In the region, we can find various fiscal and financial measures have been taken in ASEAN+ region, including supporting to the vulnerable groups and to restart the economy. The impact of COVID apparently is cross-border. This is especially true today when the global economy is closely linked. This means that we must strengthen regional financial cooperation, jointly respond to the epidemic and promote economic recovery. On the one hand, we must mobilize financial and technological resources to support each other. Given the time limit, I will not mention the detailed measures here. On the other hand, we must strengthen regional financial cooperation to provide strong impetus for economic recovery and growth. If we look at the communique of G20 finance ministers and the central bank governors meeting, as well as the joint statement of ASEAN+3 finance ministers and the central bank governors meeting, we can see lots of ongoing regional financial cooperation initiatives, such as ABMI, infrastructure financing, sustainable financing for green, resilient, and inclusive recovery. Along with other factors, the epidemic will also have a major impact on macroeconomic and financial stability. We also need to strengthen the construction of the regional financial safety net to provide a strong guarantee for stable recovery. In fact, AMRO and the CMIM are very important part of the macro and the financial stability system of ASEAN+ region. In total, regional financial cooperation has played an important role and has contributed a lot to the region's recovery. According to AMRO's projection in July, ASEAN+ region is expected to grow at 4.3 this year, much better than many other regions in the world. I believe regional cooperation has contributed a lot to the growth. And I also believe it will play an important role in the future. Let me stop here now, Emmanuel.
Thanks very much, Kouqing. Really a sobering message at a time when actually we see some countries, in fact, shying away from cooperation. And I really hope that you're right, that that will get back on track. Oscar, even before the pandemic, the world had already committed itself to really challenging goals led by the UN. The Sustainable Development Goals are coming up in 2030. And even during the pandemic, we didn't get time off. I don't think you're going to extend that by 2 years because of the pandemic. So this is a huge challenge. Can you share with us your thoughts from your perspective on how the world can make up for that lost time and how evaluation might be able to help?
Indeed. Thank you very much, Manny, and to you and the organizers of this important event. I'm delighted to be with you. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit development hard, and we have seen a setback in the Sustainable Development Goals on many fronts. Education has been mentioned, health, and of course, also hunger we see on the rise. Therefore, the UNDP Independent Evaluation Office has conducted a formative evaluation on financing the recovery from COVID-19. What can we learn from evaluation to refocus our effort to try to achieve a sustainable development future for all, one that is more inclusive, equitable, and in better relationship with the planet, with the nature. So as part of the main challenges, I think this session on reframing evaluation could not be more timely. We need to reframe evaluation in order to promote transformational change, because really incremental changes will not lead us where we need to be. The compounded effects of the crisis require really a transformative approach. For that, allow me to highlight three elements that I think are necessary to move into this direction. The first one is strengthening national evaluation capacities, national evaluation monitoring and evaluation systems. That is why UNDP is spearheading, together with the independent evaluation group of the World Bank, what we call the Global Evaluation Initiative, to strengthen national evaluation systems. And we think that after the pandemic, we need a new agenda for national evaluation capacities, one that takes into account the intersections between sectors and national policies, one that takes into account the intersections between provincial, municipal, state level, the three levels of management. And we have seen during the pandemic how critical it is for addressing the needs of our populations. And the idea that we can do more together in a global evaluation initiative than in isolation. The second element is that there is enough evidence out there about what is working, what is not working, and why things are not working, to start addressing the policy dimensions at the national level to enhance the fiscal space that governments have to really address these issues. We need more financing, and the sources for financing are domestic resource mobilization, ODA, and also the participation of the private sector in development. But in order to really cater this wealth of knowledge into better policies and decision making, we need more synthesis. That is why we are really promoting a global initiative to produce synthesis about what is working for the achievement of the SDGs before we reach the deadline of the 2030, and try to learn from evaluation to shape the new development agenda, the post-SDG development agenda, with the evaluative evidence that we have in hand. And one way of dealing with all this information is to really apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to extract the wealth of evaluative evidence provided by all our countries and organizations. And for that, we are developing tools such as the Artificial Intelligence for Development Analytics, AIDA, an instrument that UNDP is putting at the service of the United Nations and partners to extract evaluative evidence from with the use of information and communication technologies. These are not exhaustive topics. We are dealing with very complex challenges, but we think that addressing the challenges of the recovery together will require a reframing of the evaluation function. Let me stop there, Manny.
Thanks very much, Oscar. I mean, your messages about capacity building, because in the end, it's the developing countries themselves that need to see how they're doing and what can be done, and also how to use new technologies to help us harvest lessons and on what works are really going to be important. And I do know about AIDA. We have our own called EVA, and perhaps one day they will meet. Joe, Puri, you come to this panel with the potential to add from very different perspectives just by yourself. You're now, of course, at IFAD, head of knowledge, and I imagine food security is at the top of your agenda from that point of view. But before you did that, you were at the Green Climate Fund, where the existential issues of climate change be dealt with. So you were never one to shy away from important topics. But I also know you from your evaluation experience. So my question to you is, this whole nexus of the various challenges in the world today, climate change and food security and many others, I'm sure you've thought about how your profession as an evaluator can really help. So over to you for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Manny, and really such a delight for me to be here, and not just with you, of course, but also with Oscar, Secretary RC, and Dr. Lee, and Sona as well. So thank you very much for having me here. So Manny, I lead the strategy in the knowledge department, which essentially means that we lead on all things technical within operations. And so food security and climate become really very much a part of my overall thought process as well as planning. And with your permission, I wanted to, I know I have 4 minutes, that's what we have, but I wanted to share a couple of slides on this. So I want to make 2 points. First, I think what evaluation is showing is that we have an opportunity right now. Both to be relevant and useful. And evaluation is not, obviously, as many of you know, not just the function that the evaluation office does, but it's a culture within an organization to really look in a hard-hitting way at the phenomena around us and to provide evidence that is useful, that can help us become faster, stronger, and better. And so my first key message is that I think it becomes an important responsibility for the evaluation function to call it. And in the climate space, I think what we are seeing is, and you said that I have a reputation for being hard-hitting, so let me say the first thing, the emperor has no clothes. In terms of what we are doing with respect to climate reporting, what we are recognizing is that currently climate reporting is just not doing its job in terms of letting us know as to what can be done better and how can we prevent climate change. And this is primarily, and I'll talk about that later, because of climate washing. Many institutions come up with excuses about not being able to do this because of COVID or climate change or exogenous shocks. And what IFAD has shown, both within the evaluation function as well as within my department, is that many instruments are out there, something as primitive as online diaries, but also in terms of ICT. But the other function, I think, of evaluation in this system and in this space is to call it to say that, look, if for climate reporting, we need to look at general equilibrium effects and not just how much money we are putting into the system. We've also got to move away from anthropogenic approaches, which, anthropocentric approaches, which is just looking at the consequences of climate on human beings. And it's really important that we put, the health of the globe in the center of this debate. My second message, Manny, is that we've got to measure climate adaptation and resilience, and this needs to become an industry standard. I won't go into, all of the cool stuff that IFAD is doing essentially to measure otherwise complicated phenomena such as resilience and market access, but we are able to measure this in high confidence and with good T statistics if you're interested in that. But I think what this is teaching us, and this is something that hopefully evaluation can take forward, is that we need to think in a forward-looking way. The difference between a 1.5 degree world and a 2 degree world is huge. In 1.5 degrees, we've got a 70% likelihood of coral reefs dying, and maybe iceless summers once per century. People affected 6 million. But if we go to a 2 degree world, which is what will happen if we continue to impact wash, there's almost 100% probability that our coral reef will die and that we will have iceless summers once per decade. And the number of people affected by sea level rise would be 16 million. So these are huge magnitude of impacts if we are not careful about how well we are reporting. Thank you, Manny.
Great, Joe. Thanks very much. That was you came across with messages that were not only hard hitting but very visual and in less time than you thought you were going to. So that's wonderful. And I think your messages about climate reporting really resonate, I think, with a lot of people. And I was wondering, in fact, if I could turn to Oscar. Given what Joe has said, Oscar, about the challenge for the world to basically own up to the problem. What do you see is being done at the UN and other organizations? What can be done for us as a global community to help address those issues that Joe raised?
Absolutely. I think that there is increasing awareness that the evidence is there, the scientific data gathered by the IPCC in its iterative reports is very clear, and the messages for collective actions are there. We are trying to get a better agreement in the COPs, and the next one in Egypt, where an urgent call for action from all the countries from the north and the south are required to address this global climate emergency. The Secretary General has been calling repeatedly to concerted action, but we're living in a real world where policymakers have tough choices to make. The recent fuel and food crisis originated by the conflict in Ukraine has put some very difficult choices, and therefore we need to keep on pressing for the long-term needs of the transition to a net zero carbon emission economy and society. Therefore, I think the items for the agenda are there, but we need to really identify the policy options that are viable according to the specific context in which countries are transitioning to a more sustainable development pathway.
Thanks, Oscar. RC, I mean, the Philippines is in a way a poster child for given its exposure to the risks from climate that Joe has laid out. And are there initiatives that you see that governments here can undertake to address those challenges, as Joe mentioned?
Well, yeah, I think the most pressing concern for a country like us, emerging developing country, is especially emerging from a crisis, health and economic, is the fact that the fiscal space is very narrow, right? We spent a lot of resources from addressing to address the crisis, particularly the health, and the effect. The consequence of that is our borrowing has increased quite. It has become quite high. And approaching some levels that could make us quite vulnerable to or make us quite a risky country from the perspective of investors, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So the challenge is that we need to refocus our interventions in such a way that we can emerge quickly from the pandemic, going back to the high growth trajectory, but at the same time mindful that the world is quite different, and that, as been said, we would like to move to a situation, a growth path that would lead us to a more inclusive, more resilient, more green environment or development. So it's an entirely different world, and here building the capacity for impact evaluation is very clear. It's quite urgent even for a country like us. But again, the political economy of impact evaluation is such that resources are not given high priority to projects like this by governments, by policymakers, by politicians, who are responding to the more urgent and more visible projects. Impact evaluation usually do not attract supporters, except for a few who believe in the science of and usefulness of impact evaluation. So that's where we come from, that even in our office at NEDA, the National Economic Development Authority, we are I would like to say leading the effort to to building capacity and impact evaluation. Way back in 2015, I together with our budget ministry, we established some funds toward building capacity and doing impact evaluations, and the belief that we could we would be able to successfully or would have a better probability of achieving success in our interventions if those interventions or policy choices are informed by evidence. And so over the years that followed since 2015, we have had a number of impact evaluations that target or focused on critical areas affecting poverty, and that's quite the experience was quite successful, and many of the outputs of such exercise were presented at the highest policy level of government and have helped influence some of the policy choices that we have made. But then again, I guess the challenge for governments like us, for countries like us, is the continuity, the sustainability of such exercise. And I think that we have to think hard about the institutionalization of capacity building for monitoring and evaluation in governments, in government bureaucracy, because when the champions of impact evaluation in governments disappear, so are the so is the focus on or interest in impact evaluation also disappear. So that's I think that the issue, and what we're trying to do now is to get impact evaluation into our institutional framework. We are working toward getting a legislation to institutionalize impact evaluation, so that governments would be required to undertake impact evaluation and do assessment of those policy choices when especially on the matters that are relevant to development. I'll stop there, Manny, because I
no thanks. Wow, a lot of rich thoughts. Let me just pick on two things, and maybe I'll ask Joe and Kouqing actually to refer to them. First, Joe, RC talked about trade-offs given the budget constraints. And these are trade-offs among potentially existential issues. Food security and climate change. And can you perhaps reflect on how IFAD is approaching this, and how to help countries prioritize? And the second question I have is, of course, I can't resist the question on capacity building for impact evaluation, but I'll hold off on that for a second. But I'd like Joe and Kouqing, if you could reflect on this issue of trade-offs and the fiscal constraint that RC talked about. Joe?
Thank you very much, Manny. So with your permission, I'm going to sort of paraphrase that question, and please let me know if I've done it wrong. But you're essentially asking us trade-offs in the context of fiscal constraints, and how can evaluation help on either side, right? Or
yes. First, how does IFAD approach this issue of potential trade-offs given the budget? Secondly, what can evaluation do to help?
Yeah. So just on the first question, what does IFAD do? How does IFAD deal with the problem of trade-offs? I think on one side, I can give the more pedantic response that yes, we look at evidence of what is working and value for money. But frankly, as we know, most strategic choices are also made in the political context, and we know that those choices need to be made, as Secretary RC said, very quickly and from the seat of your pants, essentially. So what we try to do in the strategy and knowledge department is really be ready with a lot of the synthesis actually that Oscar referred to. A lot of the synthesis work that has gone on really in the climate space, in the behavior space, in the gender space, then helps us to be ready every time those decisions have to be made. So for example, in the context of the Ukraine energy crisis, one of the questions, and it was an existential question for IFAD, was, should we suddenly overnight change our operations to think about, well, humanitarian assistance? Because humanitarian relief is clearly key, and this is what Secretary RC referred to as well. What our evidence is showing is actually IFAD does really well in developing, sustaining, and creating markets for smallholder farmers in rural areas in developing countries. And our evidence is showing that successively. And when we've synthesized that evidence also through meta-analysis, you'll be happy to know that, we can show it with high degree of confidence. So we use that evidence then to also direct the strategic choices that IFAD is making, which is to say, IFAD is not a humanitarian agency. And we've been very clear about that with member states, even though the pressures have been quite the contrary, to essentially say where we can come in is we want to look at medium and longer term resilience of smallholder farmers, and the evidence is showing that we're really good at it. So that's the first part of your question. But I do think that evaluation can, for example, do really well. Climate debt swaps. That's an instrument, it's a financial instrument where you can think about high indebted countries can essentially trade off their debt for financial insertions, which are climate resilient and low emission, so long as indebted countries are able to take those pathways. I do think that we need to develop some of that evidence. I sort of take a slightly contrary view to this from what Oscar said, that we have tons of evidence. Actually, in the system space and in the space where we are working now, which is very complex, we actually don't know much about what works in terms of complexity. I think we know for partial equilibrium solutions as to what works, but not in general equilibrium spaces. And so I do think that that's the opportunity for evaluation, and that has to be the next frontier, because all policies have to work in a space where you have interacting strategies, policies, and interventions, and that's what evaluation should be referring to, systems change. One more point, Manny. One thing that has also come out from evaluations and evidence is that actually investing in adaptation today gives you a 7-time return on your investment compared to what you would have to invest for humanitarian action. So emergency action is all very good, but if you invested in adaptation and resilience today, you would have avoided costs which are 7 times greater. Thank you.
Thanks. I want to go. Thank you very much. I want to go to Kouqing, but first, can I just follow up with a question for you, Joe? As you move into what you call general equilibrium space, that in fact, the link between interventions and outcomes is much more complex than can be, say, evaluated in an impact evaluation through randomized control trial. Do you see that we have the tools in our methodologies as evaluators to address these knock-on effects of interventions?
Manny, I know it's a trick question because you know the answer to this one. And the answer is obviously that most impact evaluations do very simple, one-off interventions, etc. Some impact evaluations have been looking at second-order effects of price changes, etc. But they're very few and in between. But I think the challenge has to be that as institutions, we've got to ask for better methodology. I mean, the world has evolved primarily because there are institutions that are asking for better evidence. And as a demander and user of evidence, I'm going to put that gauntlet out to, the evaluation community. Show me the methods and tools, because I can't believe, given all the brain power we have here, that we can't do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you. Kouqing, I mean, you must think about these fiscal issues that both RC and Joe have discussed all the time in AMRO. What kinds of analysis and evidence do we need to address these very thorny trade-offs?
Thank you, Manny. It is true that during the past almost 3 years, the world, including our region, is addressing the COVID issue. Recently, because of the rising inflation, so many governments have to spend a lot to support the vulnerables, which means the fiscal space for many countries, as DG from Philippines mentioned, is very, very limited. Yeah, in AMRO, of course, we look at this issue very closely. Then how do we look at this issue from evaluation's perspective? Or what's the implication of limited fiscal space for evaluation? I think apparently it means opportunity for evaluators, because as physical space is very limited, the usable public resources is very, very limited. When we come out a new policy, a new decision, it has to be evidence-based, which means under a bigger and bigger fiscal pressure, when we try to do a better decision, we have to rely on high quality evaluation. We must make a better use of evaluation results. At the same time, apparently, it also means a challenge for evaluators, because the physical space is very limited, which means possibly the resources can be used for evaluation will also be limited. And at the same time, as an evaluator, I think our several panelists have pointed out very correctly, we're facing a lot of unusual issues, new emerging issues. We cannot copy the old way to address on the completely new issues. So in this way, it means evaluators must strengthen its capacity, strengthen its capacity building. At the same time, evaluators from different areas, from different countries, must also try to learn each other. That's why I believe the cooperation in evaluation area is become more important. I think this can also justify the value of Asian Evaluation Week. I guess maybe in the future, IED and maybe evaluation department from World Bank, from UN, from IFAD, and so on. Of course, also including FDI, should work more on this area. So to facilitate a better mutual learning from the past evaluation, from others' evaluation, So by doing this, we can address the physical constraint in a better way. Let me stop here.
Thanks very much, Kouqing. Oscar, both Kouqing and Secretary Arsi mentioned this important challenge that we have, is that you are trying to tackle, which is on capacity building for evaluation. At the same time, Joe has raised a challenge for us that, and I see that Marvin, my predecessor here, has also said that, look, there are all these new techniques we need to try, we need to develop, and need to try out. Real-time evaluations is something Marvin mentioned. Joe mentioned, second round effects through general equilibrium analysis. It's hard enough, I would imagine, trying to build capacity with simple methods. What are some approaches we as a community can take to really address the need for new methods to address really more difficult and wicked topics?
Indeed, I think there is a need for innovation in evaluation, and those innovations are taking place with as you mentioned, the nature of the topics that are now being evaluated have gone far beyond a project and small interventions to try to address more systemic issues. And when we see problems such as climate change, increased inequalities, or conflict, there is no other way than really by changing your approaches and frameworks. And that's why reframing evaluation is so important, to try to address this with new instruments. Those instruments are related to system thinking, where we can really identify the different learning loops that are required for transformational change. And within those different learning loops, I think impact evaluations have a place to play, as well as more other type, comprehensive type of evaluations. And of course, formative and real-time evaluations have come very handy to respond to the pandemic. As such, from the formative evaluation that we did on financing the recovery, what did we learn? That there are important mechanisms being put in place, such as the integrated national financial frameworks. Integrated national financial frameworks are the spaces where in different countries we can identify these trade-offs of limited fiscal space, try to enhance the tax collection in any given country to mobilize internal resources, as well as to try to integrate the contribution of the private sector by creating investment platforms. And investment platforms require new approaches to financing as well, with more innovative instruments based on national currencies and based on different swaps and issuing bonds mechanisms that can amplify the repertoire of tools that we need for addressing a very significant and substantial financial gap that we have in order to address the needs of our populations to recover from the crisis. And therefore, I think evaluation can really play a very significant role in readdressing the priorities of what is needed to come out of the crisis. So many topics, Manny. I hope.
No, thanks very much, Oscar. Arsi, both Oscar and Joe mentioned systems learning, not just for evaluation, but for data gathering. And there's also a question in the chat about, in fact, what kind of progress can be made? Is this something that I know that there's been a movement here to legislate evaluation policy in the country? What can be done to make sure that these learning systems are institutionalized in a country like the Philippines?
Yeah, thank you, Manny. Well, let me note first that I think the crisis that we are talking about and the implication of this crisis and an evaluation is so different. The pandemic affected the whole country, right? I mean, and it's complicated by by inflation, by recently, right, and the increases interest rate in that have all these macroeconomic consequences, not just of the COVID, but the current headwinds, originating from the external sources, of course, the Ukraine and the Russia war. So I guess that when we think about the tools that we have to address those the issues, the impact of this on poverty and hunger, and we can think about incremental, or those little things that you can tweak. And I think that was Joe was mentioning, that we have to think about the bigger system, right? But unfortunately, our tools in understanding the systems are quite limited, especially for a country like us. And if you are looking for a policymaker like us, we are looking for a specific policy instrument that you can tweak, right? And unfortunately, that goes beyond those system thinking. Your system thinking would involve all this interagency, interdepartmental, interpolicy coordination, and yet our the tools of impact evaluation, as we have been using, at least the traditional ones. There are new ones that are emerging, but the ones that we are quite familiar with are quite incrementalist. If there's a better way of describing that, it's one policy lever at a time. Somehow that works, and for a particular issue, particular problem. But the current issues require immediate actions that involve a lot of or a mixture of tools, and that's where I guess where we have some we are quite blind insofar as the tools of impact evaluations are concerned. I was a student and serious practitioner of CGE, computable general equilibrium, when I was an academic. But when I was in government, I find it completely useless, because the kind of questions that are being asked is not about moving from one equilibrium to another equilibrium, and but it is the question is usually how to go there. And usually when you ask that question, how to go there, you start thinking about the policy lever, specific policy lever, right? And so I think while CGEs are very useful as a pedagogical tool and as a way of thinking about long-term issues, but I think once you are in the policy making, in the execution of programs, you can't help but ask for tools that allow you to track how you would move from one point to another point, and that is not what most general equilibrium outcomes show us, unfortunately. And so I can stop there, and
thanks, Arsi. And I want to get the reaction of both Joe and Oscar on that point. But first, there was a specific question as you talked about systems, Arsi, to you from the audience on whether or not the national evaluation policy working its way through Congress is a priority, and what are the chances that it'll go through? Is it really needed as you try to institutionalize that kind of thinking in the country?
Still be money?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that one. Yeah. Yes, we have been pushing at NEDA for a a longer term, a more permanent fixture for our monitoring and evaluation. And I think the kind of model that I'm looking at is the one in Korea, where before a legislation is passed, they get to have an assessment of that proposed law or bill before it gets into account. I think that's a kind of frame that I would like to see in the Philippines, that we do think carefully about the laws that we passed, and that we are informed, that our legislators are properly informed about the ex ante evidence and what the consequences are of those laws. We will post for this bill. The priority of governments, unfortunately, at the moment, is to address the current crisis, and our government has already, or the president has already lined up what those current priority legislations are. But if we have space, and I will push for this. But for now, I think we have to attend to the more urgent issues of restoring the fiscal balance, the economy getting back to the long-term growth trajectory, addressing the current inflation and these vulnerability issues that our population were subjected to during the crisis, and the socioeconomic scarring. I mean, there's a lot that we need to do, but we just like in monitoring evaluation, we just have to choose for now the kind of efforts that we would have to focus on to be more successful moving forward.
No, thanks. Wow, that's a really ambitious target, is to ask lawmakers before they propose a law to see whether it's evaluable in effect. I think that's a great idea. So I wish you all the luck. Joe and Oscar, I want to get back to the point that RC made about evaluating transformational change in effect, and how it is a general equilibrium approach, but in the end, transformational change is often made up of incremental policy changes that have to add up to transformational change. I know there have been a couple of sessions on transformational change, and I was wondering if you could reflect on evaluation and transformational change. So Oscar, first, over to you.
Thank you, Manny. Thanks. Very good questions. And indeed, I think we need to understand that there are some levers that trigger transformational change more easily than others, right? And for that, how can we understand the system to identify those levers? And the instruments that we have had at our disposal right now are more limited, as well recognized by Secretary Arsenio. However, I think the efforts that he's making to institutionalize monitoring and evaluation systems into the legislative architecture of a country are of paramount importance, because it is within that framework that we can find the necessary innovation in methods to try to address these issues. There are, for example, system dynamics modeling, right, that go beyond the traditional approach to general equilibrium, where you can see the variables interacting within themselves and resemble better the choices that policymakers need to take. And therefore, I think we have space for improving the instruments and the tools that we may use, but opening that institutionalization of the importance of monitoring and evaluation for evidence-based policy making is of the utmost importance. And I think examples such as the Philippines should be a follow-up by other countries in the region and beyond.
No, thanks, Oscar. Joel, I want to turn to you. In your answer too, could you perhaps also opine on the question on the chat on whether or not the kinds of standards that, say, Campbell and others have suggested are still valid as we think about these kinds of studies? Over to you.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you for giving me the easy questions. So let me first take this transformational question, right? In 1962, there was a lovely book that was published, which by Thomas Kuhn, which talked about the nature of scientific revolutions, and it basically said that even when you have evidence, it's not as if you're going to be able to bring about a change in either behavior or opinion. What you require, and then Thomas Kuhn actually looks at the history of scientific revolutions and how changes occurred really in human mindsets. It basically opines, and it's really important, therefore, to have theoretical basis to everything that we do, including data and evaluations. But what he essentially says is that you have a mindset that is given, and then there is a simultaneously through evaluation, through evidence, you have the buildup of what is called anomalies. They build up one on top of the other. And it is when the anomalies become so many at the aggregate that you realize that your overall idea of the world as it existed previously is completely contradicted by the evidence, that there is then a tipping point, or what I would call a transformation. And he gives the example of a heliocentric world, right? So earlier, we thought that the world was, that the Earth was the center of the universe. Even after we could see the sun, and with the discovery of the telescope, the world took 250 years to essentially change its opinion. And that's because the anomalies really built up. But the anomalies came from science, and they came from evaluation or evidence collection. And then they led to a tipping point essentially in the world. And I think that's the function that evaluation can do for us, right? It can create those anomalies over and over, keep giving us synthesized evidence that says, okay, this is not working, this is not working, and then we can hope for a tipping point. It can therefore help that transformation. Using that, then I want to move very quickly to the challenge that Secretary RC threw, which is, well, CG as a model, as a methodology is not very useful. And with huge respect, I completely agree with you. But then I want to be a little bit, how should I say, provocative, and say that instead of talking about evidence for our policies, let's talk about policy-based evidence. You've got a policy in your mind, and let's look at how the models that we have, including CG models, can lead us through the increments that Oscar was talking about, and see as to what is the evidence that is emerging in terms of what will be the trade-offs. Every policy has a trade-off, and you as a policymaker clearly have to keep determining as to whether the trade-offs in every step are really going to be useful. So fine, let's turn the entire paradigm on its head, and instead of saying evidence-based policy, let's think about policy-based evidence. And structure really, the questions that we have around the uses that it will be put to. And then CG models, then impact evaluations, etc., can be really useful, because if we look at the overall theories of change, we know which nodes to examine best. And then the last question, Manny, which is, is Campbell still relevant, given that we are talking about complex systems? And I do want to say that, like with everything else, moderation is best. I do think that Campbell and the standards that it sets are really important, because if you think of the nodes within a typical theory of change, you're changing one thing. We still think in partial equilibrium ways, unfortunately. And it is important for us to know, does community-driven development work or not? Do farmers field schools work or not? What are the challenges that occur? And the Campbell guidance on synthesis of evidence does help us understand bias, rigor, as well as the confidence that we can place in the evidence. And so I do think that they remain relevant, but again, Campbell will have to up its game as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much. RC, any reactions to what Joe just said? And then I just want to warn everyone, we're coming up to the end, so I'm going to give you each 30 seconds for a last word. But first, RC, I wanted to know if you had any reactions to what Joe just said.
No, I think that I agree with Joe's distinction between evidence-based policy and policy-based evidence. I think that has to be clear, and I don't have any quarrel with that. And but clearly, I think the dynamics is of a policy change is very important, and because again, we are not so much in. While we want to know and we determine where we want to go, for the policymaker who has to fight a budget every year, to go to to reach the destination, he would have to have in a way it's like a traffic direction, and it would be able to monitor get or to move to follow the track toward going to that destination, and so it's really how to get there as opposed to shifting from one equilibrium to another, one point to another, but it's really for policymakers who are responding to the to demands for among their constituents. They are interested on what's this, and the track, the path, a specific path, and in moving following that track. So there. Money.
Great. No, thank you very much. Now I want to turn to our last round, and I just want to ask our panel, and I'll begin with you, Kouqing, if I might. 30 seconds on, you have an audience here of evaluators. What advice would you have for us as evaluators in reframing evaluation to help guide us back to a recovery that is green, inclusive, and resilient? So just in very briefly, what is the top priority in your mind based on the conversation we've had today?
Many. Before I use my very precious 30 seconds, I want to say a few words regarding Joe's distinction between evidence-based and evidence-based policy and the policy-based evidence. I think the distinction between these two is very interesting. But anyway, when we discuss policy-based evidence, I guess we must be very, very careful. We must try to avoid any misunderstanding on policy-based evidence. As we discussed earlier, everything actually has its trade-off. You can always find some evidence for a certain policy, right? The pros and the cons. That's a point I want to address. So now let me use my 30 seconds. I think we've had a very good discussion. The point I want to suggest is, in order to make a better use of evaluation resources, I would like to suggest ADB, IED, to lead an initiative that is to come out a global evaluation library. I mean, for the all the evaluation projects, IED has done the UN has done, IFAD has done, World Bank has done. Actually, all those are very, very valuable. If we can come out a kind of index, then it must be very helpful for people all over the world to learn from that very valuable assets. Yeah, okay, given the time, I just stop here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kouqing. Oscar.
The COVID-19 pandemic and the compounded crisis that we are seeing are causing a lot of suffering. And therefore, my message would be we need to act fast and provide answers to our populations. Otherwise, all the utility of evaluation, if it's not timely, we will not address and respond to the needs, and people are losing patience. And therefore, it's a call for action to the evaluation community to try to come together in initiatives such as the one proposed by Kouqing. A global evaluation library would be fantastic, right? Where we really put together all our efforts to respond to the pressing questions of our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Manny. So my takeaway is tell the stories. Tell the stories. So I spent the summer reading 3 fantastic books on climate. One was The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. The second one was The Little Ice Age and How Climate Made History Between 1300 and 1850. And for anyone who really wants and the third one was a 900-page tome called Ministry of the Future. And they're all amazing flights into the future to make us imagine as to what this world will look like for climate. So while my evaluation brain is always active and I'm always looking for evidence, I thought it brought together all of the evidence that we know about what works, what doesn't, into these fantastic stories crafted by master storytellers. That's our challenge.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. RC, over to you. What should we as evaluators think about?
Yes, thank you, Manny. I would ask and I would suggest collaboration, partnership, especially between development partners like ADB, ADBI, IFAD, UN, World Bank, with the developing countries, emerging countries, especially in times of crisis. As I said earlier, in times of crisis, evaluation takes a back seat. Because the other high priority issues take the front seat, and at the same time, this were when we need evidence and we need evaluation even more. No? That's so the partnership between a development institutions out there and developing countries. Especially in agencies, so where they have champions and impact evaluation or M&Es, I think that kind of partnership will go a long way in addressing the development issues in emerging country, developing country. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard them. Bring the evidence together, perhaps in a library, okay? But do it quickly, as Oscar mentioned. And tell it in a way that's compelling. Tell that story, as Joe said, okay? And do it together, as RC mentioned. Great messages all around. And with that, I want to thank you for it being a fascinating conversation and a very, very interesting one. I want to turn it now over to Vice President Liu Qin of SNAI AFDI for his final words on AEW. Thank you again.
好，谢谢西蒙利斯局长，各位嘉宾、女士们、先生们啊，大家好。在这涤萃流金的初秋的时节呢，我们以线上的形式在虚拟空间上相聚在一起啊，共商绩效评价的大计。在各方的紧密配合和共同努力下，由中国财政部和亚洲开发银行主办。 上海国家会计学院亚太财经发展学院和亚洲开发银行独立评价局联合承办的2022亚洲评价周已经圆满完成了 全部的预定的议程，即将胜利的闭幕。那么在这次这个亚洲评价周的举办的期间呢，我一直在思考一个问题啊，也就是说我们应该如何的评价一场论坛、一次大会，或者是类似亚洲评价周这样的系列活动的绩效。那么大家都是绩效评价方面的专家学者，一定可以帮助我找到很好的答案。那么有些人呢认为，对活动的绩效评价的指标有一些，比如说参与者的层次和数量，与会者的现场参与度，还有呢这个活动后期人员的流失率等等啊。那么我个人认为呢，这个可能更为重要的是，活动中产生的原创的思想或者是知识的数量，活动期间引发的这个头脑风暴的强度，活动后各类媒体对专家观点的引用力，以及呢这个未来实践中对知识的应用实际的应用情况等等，不知这些是不是合适啊？下面呢我就对本次亚洲评价周做一个简单的小结。那么显然根据我上面讲的这些指标，这次评价周是非常成功的啊。那么在过去的3天时间里面，我们围绕重塑评价、促进绿色、包容和有韧性的复苏这样一个大家普遍关注的重要议题，结合理论研究心得和实际工作的体会，展开了紧张而富有成效的交流的讨论。活动中有来自政府部门、业界和学界的专家学者们，从不同的视角出发，积极贡献了宝贵的治理成果和解决方案，为推动区域内绩效评价工作的进一步深入开展做出了重要的贡献。我也注意到，这些成果和共识覆盖了绩效评价的领域的方方面面，有些是针对顶层政策设计总结成效和不足的，有的呢是分析绩效评价工具和方法，进而畅想未来的技术蓝图的，有的呢是结合理论发展真实的案例反映从业过程中的心得体会。大家发言很踊跃，交流很深入，激荡思想，汇聚智慧，碰撞出很多的思想的火花，形成了诸多的共识。正如我们一直所强调的，亚洲评价周系列活动始终秉承着打造亚洲地区乃至全世界一流的绩效评价领域能力建设和交流沟通平台的初衷，致力于促进绩效评价经验和知识的分享，展示绩效评价工作的优秀的成果和重要的进展。这是本次活动的目标，更是我们今后不断努力的方向。事实上，也正是因为亚洲评价周活动在议题设计以及活动组织安排的过程中，注重实务、实用性和针对性，紧扣区域内普遍关注的难点和热点的问题，才能使与会者切身受益。经过6年的努力，亚洲评价周活动的品牌的价值已经逐步的显现，影响力呢也日益扩大。这一方面说明前期工作的努力获得了全球评价界的高度的认可，另一方面也恰恰说明评价本身的重要性和影响力在逐步的提升。朋友们，亚洲评价周活动所取得的点滴进步都离不开相关各方的大力的支持和协助。借此机会呢，我仅代表上海国家会计学院、亚太财经发展学院对联合举办亚洲评价周的中华人民共和国财政部、亚洲开发银行对本次活动的大力的支持表示衷心的感谢。对为本次亚洲评价周举办提供重要支持的世界银行、欧洲复兴开发银行、东盟与中日韩宏观经济研究办公室、联合国有关机构等多个国际组织、 区域内各国的政府、学术机构以及各位的与会者表示衷心的感谢，也对本次活动双方的秘书处表示衷心的感谢，感谢你们的辛勤的劳动。现在我宣布2022亚洲评价周胜利闭幕，祝大家身体健康，工作顺利，期待亚洲评价周2023年再见，谢谢大家。
Yes, yeah, Vice President Li Chen. And now let me turn it over to Sona for final words from the AEW side. Sona, over to you.
And as well as our panelists for this excellent session today. It is a great note to end the Asia Evaluation Week. And also, I would like to thank, of course, all the other speakers that we had over the last 3 years, the various session organizers, and the audience, the participants from the audience who joined the discussions and contributed to the success of this year's annual evaluation week. And but not least, I would also like to extend huge appreciation to the teams here at AFDI and as well as our IED team here who have worked very hard over the last several weeks and even months in preparation as well as during this week to make this possible and successful. So thank you all and look forward to seeing you all again next year.